This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Claire Kimball.
And I'm Jodie Spears.
Happy election day. Many are saying that it's been a major snooze fest, but we'll get you across some themes that are notable. You'll need something to talk about at your election parties tonight.
Yeah, if that's a thing for you, then we've definitely got your back.
The biggest story of the week and the weekend, and maybe next week, is today's federal election. There's only really one question to answer. What's the price of a dozen eggs?
I could tell you, didn't that just take off this week after the PM and the coalition leader had some trouble answering that in last Sunday's election debate on 7? The answer is about $8.50. I think the ones I buy are actually slightly more than that, but Dutton's guess of about $4.20 and Albo's $7 were short of the mark. It's not the first time the what's the price of device has been used in an election campaign. That one's a classic.
It's a perennial favourite of the media's coverage of an election campaign. It's almost like a vaudeville act in the campaign, I reckon. You roll out the leader, you watch them fail spectacularly because they never get it right. They need to accurately name the price of things. And I guess when it comes to us regular Aussies, we're buying those things day in, day out. It's a bit of a metric about whether these people are in touch or not.
Yeah, they do live a different life. You were telling me from your experience of working for one of the leaders during an election campaign that they do absolutely prepare for this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So one of the jobs that had to get done each week was someone was responsible for this one-page cheat sheet. It had things like the price of a litre of milk, a loaf of bread, a litre of fuel, the unemployment rate, the official interest rate, that sort of stuff. And the trick really was making sure that your boss had a look at it and actually clocked those numbers, because you just never knew, not just in an election campaign, you never knew when a journalist would ask that question or you'd be on radio and someone would spring it on you.
Yeah, I remember last election campaign, Albanese couldn't name the unemployment rate or the interest rate on day one of the campaign, and there were tons of headlines about whether he was up for the job on the basis of that.
Wasn't that an awkward moment? I remember where it was too. I think he was in a park, like in Launceston or something, and it was like, oh, gee.
Here we go.
That's quite a start.
And it was similar during this debate. It was almost that slow-motion car crash where you're like, what's he going to say?
But look, Albanese overcame it. It wasn't so catastrophic after all. But as far as this chapter in the election, I reckon it might be one of the very few things that people do actually remember from the campaign, I guess, if they really remember anything at all.
Yeah, if you Google the words boring and 2025 election campaign, there is an alarming number of news articles that come up from that. I should say, though, that lots of them are written by journalists who have a vested interest in wanting more drama on the campaign.
They really do want drama. And of course they do, because these are people who have just put their lives on hold for a month to jump on a plane, not knowing where they're going on any given day, and then bundled off and taken to a petrol station or taken to a park in Launceston. And I should say, Jodie, that's how we met, was the 2010 election campaign. You were covering that campaign for 7. And I guess I wanted to ask what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, really intense. Like you just said, it's like the world's longest mystery trip. 5 weeks, I think it was, during that campaign. We were on the road. There's no day off. You are go, go, go every day. Oftentimes a couple of states in one day, and you don't, like you said, you don't know where you're going. So it was only maybe when we were in the air that they'd say, oh, we're going to Alice Springs. The red dirt probably was a giveaway in that case. But, you know, you might be going to Tassie, you might be going to Cairns. And the way that we did it was we spent a week on each side and we alternated. So I was with Gillard for a week, I was with Abbott for a week, and that sort of
mixed it up a bit.
Yeah, it means that you don't kind of fall in too heavily with one side, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess working for a politician, you do know where you're going today and tomorrow and the day after. But for the journalists, they have no idea. You just get up, get on a bus, get on a plane.
And you guys are very tight-lipped.
Very tight-lipped.
We do try.
Very discreet. Look, I thought Phil Corey from the Financial Review, with this question about how dull this election campaign has been, I thought he put it really well. He says that from an execution perspective, Albanese's campaign has been almost flawless. He said that's in stark contrast to his campaign in 2022. We just talked about day one for Albanese last time around, getting those numbers wrong, which was a bit of a train wreck. And what Corey says is you sort of got to put Dutton's campaign in that perspective as well.
Yeah, Phil Curry always puts it well, I think, and is also a lovely person to junior journos from my experience. I think it's easy to assume that these people are experts at campaigning, but an election campaign as a leader is a whole other world. And if you haven't done it before, then your lack of experience can be exposed on a pretty grand scale.
Yeah, I mean, these are people who are in front of the media all the time, but a campaign sort of has a whole life of its own, and the mechanics of how it actually works are very, very specific to that 5 or 6 or 7 week period.
Whatever the result is, there will be a lot more of that analysis to come. No doubt we'll be talking about it next week as well. It's also notable that this campaign has been interrupted by a whole bunch of other events.
Yeah, it feels like this final week of the campaign really has been the only one with a lot of clean air around it. The first 2 weeks, it was dominated by Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. That was the biggest news story, not just here in Australia, but across the world. That stole a lot of attention and dominated the campaigns. There was 10 days where Aussies quite rightly tuned out. We had Easter and then we had the Anzac Day long weekend. So getting attention for an election campaign during that period was pretty tough. And then the Pope died, which dominated the news cycle for another week.
Yeah, pretty unlucky for them, really. Even this week, watching the TV news here in Sydney, the first 2 stories all week pretty much have been the inquest into the Bondi Junction stabbing attack and Erin Patterson's murder trial. So the election has struggled to get a look in at all, really.
Yeah, it really has. And maybe if our leaders were doing big, exciting, drama-filled things, it might have been a bit further up those news bulletins. But look, we've just talked about why this campaign hasn't been one for the ages. There have been some things to note, though. Earlier this week, I set us the challenge, Jodie, to zero in on one thing that we think makes it notable. I'm taking on communications and the impact of social media. You've got the rise of early voting.
Yeah, a couple of shifts and trends which are actually, I think, related that we found interesting.
Yeah, exactly right. There are some interesting things in this campaign. So, look, I just wanted to clock that if I had the mind to do some postgraduate study, which I don't.
Be careful, Claire.
I know. You've definitely given me some good advice on that. If I wanted to write a thesis, it probably would be on this sort of really big change around social media and how Australians are consuming news. I'm wondering if at least some of this disconnect, why this campaign has been seen as boring, is this sort of, whether our politicians are actually being successful in delivering their campaign messages in the channels where people are actually consuming information these days.
You're talking about the fact that people are largely tuning out to mainstream media.
Yeah, exactly right. So when you look at some of the big reports that have been done, we're at a bit of a tipping point this year, which is that for the first time, more than half of us won't be getting our news from mainstream media, which is a big change when you think about then how election campaigns are run. The campaigns are basically, as we've just talked about, putting a bunch of journalists on a plane, getting them to a town or a city and doing an event and then doing a press conference and then getting on with your day. But if more than half of us aren't consuming that information in that way, the jury's really out whether the campaign messages are cutting through.
Yeah, it's a real tipping point, isn't it? And I remember noticing this a long time before I left my job in the mainstream media. None of my friends were watching the TV news at all.
Yeah, and it's something that we've been talking about for quite a while now, but it feels, I think, like it's a really stark in focus thing, this election campaign. And I have no doubt that the major parties will report that they've actually spent more money promoting their messages in social media than ever before, but they're mostly attack ads. And that's not really high quality information either.
Not to mention those trumpet texts which we've been bombarded with. I reckon this will definitely be a subject that we return to because how we're empowered to make good decisions is actually why you started the Squiz.
Oh, yeah, exactly right. I know all of us here at the Squiz are really fascinated by how we're actually consuming news and we're motivated to do our bit, which is how we deliver news. So, yeah, I reckon it's an interesting one. Jodie, for you, early voting has just been such a thing in this election.
Yeah, this is another trend that we've noticed at recent elections, which I think continues to build. And in many ways, like I said, I think it's linked to what we've just been talking about. Part of the reason that mainstream media has declined is because people don't want to or need to wait for a certain time to watch a bulletin anymore. They also don't want or need to wait until a specific Saturday between certain hours to vote. They want to do it when it suits them.
It's this real change in us, isn't it? We want to do the thing that we want to do in the way that we want to do it when we want to do it.
Yeah, same with voting. Flexible working as well. And it might also be another COVID-related change like those things are. People voted early during the pandemic to avoid the crowds, and maybe they found that they quite liked it. And, you know, this is sort of easier than doing it the other way, so it's become a lasting change.
Yeah.
As of Wednesday, more than 4 million people had voted. No doubt that will have climbed significantly in those final days before the election. That's up at least 26% on 2022. And interestingly, 2.6 million people had applied for a postal vote, which is also a record. And it's not just the young people either who are voting early. My mum said, I did it a week ago and now I can switch off. I don't need to keep listening. I'm sick of the sight of all of them. So it's working for a lot of us.
There's some discussion, and there was even after the Queensland state election last year, because 2/3 of Queenslanders voted early. So, 2 million people getting in before official election day in a state like Queensland is quite a dramatic shift when it comes to the campaigns and how they're getting information. Like, are you calling your campaign drop dead date almost 2 weeks before the actual polling day? It really limits the major parties in how they're going to get information out if that's the way we're going to vote in the future.
And it's quite inconvenient, I think, logistically for them as well. It means that they need to find volunteers who are willing to cover so many extra hours at these pre-polling sites. So there are wider implications, like you said, for the traditional election campaign, which is designed around communicating with voters in the lead up to that particular day. So parties really need to rethink how the campaign is done, and it's probably why we're seeing these big announcements come earlier. And perhaps why we all unfortunately get the sense that we're living in this sort of semi-permanent election campaign. It's not as such a clear start as it used to be.
It's a really good point. And it's a worldwide trend as well. It's not just here in Australia.
Have you voted?
I haven't. I wait until election
You're
day.
a traditionalist.
I'm a traditionalist.
Look, the only reason I haven't is because I'm manning the sausage sizzle at my local school, and I'm a bit concerned about the effect on the democracy sausage if people are voting early.
I know. I even have friends who have voted early, but they're still going to go and find a democracy sausage.
See, that helps us raise funds for my daughter's band.
Yeah.
But I thought this was a real sign of the times this week. Uber Eats advertising delivery of democracy sausages. And I was trying to picture what the poor sausage and bread would look like by the time it was popped on the back of the bike and showed up at your door.
That was exactly where my mind went to as well.
No
So
good.
how does that travel? I don't know that that's necessarily a really good outcome at the other end.
Someone take a photo for us if you get one, but please.
Yeah, exactly. Look, just to round us up, the numbers, Andrew and I talked about this on the Shortcuts episode, so go back to Thursday in the Squiz Today show if you want to get into some of the numbers around these things. But the two numbers to burn on your brain is that for the coalition to win, it needs a net gain of 18 seats.
It's a lot.
Huge ask. So just to give you some context, Tony Abbott in 2013, when he won government from Kevin Rudd, he won 19 seats. And that was a landslide. It was a big shift. And I think people thought going in, it was kind of a fait accompli. People thought that there was going to be a big shift towards the coalition.
I think a different mood this time, yeah.
For sure. And look, it's not just about the major parties either. The Teals and the Greens and the Independents, they're a big talking point as well. One of the big takeouts from tonight will be to see what support has actually drifted their way.